The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everybody, welcome to our webinar here this evening. My name is Stephen Gallagher. I'm Director of Dig Deep Coaching. With me here tonight is Timothy Cassidy from Peak Physical Therapy.
How you doing, everyone? Thanks, Stephen, for asking me to speak tonight, and I'd like to thank you all for listening in as well, which is a pretty horrible winter's night here in Ireland, and we're kicking off the winter season with a bang here. So today, basically, we're going to be speaking about how to maximise our winter off season and how we're going to structure it. And what we're going to be speaking about today, basically, is the effects that riding in a cycling position for prolonged periods of time, how this has an effect on our muscles, and actually the pedal revolution, the continuous pedal revolution over, again, the prolonged period of time, how this affects our muscles. So today we're going to be talking about really how we're going to address negative issues that are caused through this. So first of all, I suppose I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Click on to the next slide here. Okay, so myself, I'm a physical therapist. I'm the co-owner of Peak Physical Therapy, which we are a sports injury clinic based just outside Dublin. Before this, obviously my background is cycling, where I was a passenger national cyclist with the Irish team. I've competed in World Championships, European Championships, World Cups. I also spent time racing with the Velo Club Le Palme team for 3 years in France, in Marseille, and then finished off my career, 2 very injury-ridden careers years with the Sean Kelly team, the continental team in Belgium. And it was throughout my career, actually, I'd say 2004 was the only year that I had without injury. And it's from this that it actually led me into physical therapy. So when I began to learn how the body actually functioned, it was only a natural progression that through cycling, I found all these areas that could have been addressed through my own career. And it's led me down the path now of treating quite a lot of cyclists at the moment. In our clinic, obviously we treat a lot of the general public. We treat runners, we treat footballers, triathletes. My keen interest is in cycling, as there's an awful lot of negative effects from riding in a prolonged position on the bike. So I'm going to click on here.
And just before we get started, at the end we're going to have a section where there's a questions and answers. So for people that are asking questions, and if you would like to have any questions at the end, just type it into the wee box there. You'll see there's a wee panel saying questions. If you want, you can type it in, obviously, during the webinar, which is probably going to last the most of the next hour. And what we'll do is we'll try and get through as many questions as possible at the end. So if you can, just keep typing away, and we'll try and get to as many at the end. So yeah, over to Tim.
Okay. So first of all, I'm going to teach us about basically educate you a little bit about the anatomy first, because we have to have a good idea of what's going on and the positions that we're holding. So everything that we're going to learn about today is going to be based around having a neutral spine. And when we talk about a neutral spine, our spine has 3 C shapes. We have our cervical vertebrae in the neck, we have our thoracic vertebrae in the upper back, and then we have our lumbar vertebrae in our lower back, our 5 lumbar vertebrae. Now the lumbar vertebrae is a very important part for us, where we find this, ideally our spine is in its strongest point in its neutral position. And the problem on a bike is when we lean forward to hold the handlebars, we pull this position, we pull our spine out of its neutral position, compromising the spine. So everything that we learn today is going to be based around how we maintain this position, and all the effects all the different areas that affect us from holding this position. So I'm going to click on here again. So I'm just going to put this down here. Okay, so this is just a slight demonstration of what we're talking about in neutral position. The guy standing on the left here in the image, he's shown us basically a perfect neutral spine while using a dowel rod to make it a little bit easier on ourselves. As this guy bends forward, similar to what we're going to be seated in a cycling position, we can see that the movement forward is all coming from his hips, and without flexibility in this area, what happens is you end up using your lumbar spine, pulling it out of its natural lumbar lordosis, and we're going to go into that a little bit better now in a few seconds and explain why this is so important. Click on here again. Okay, so there's 4 key areas that we have to focus on today. Mobility, flexibility, stability, and strength. These 4 key areas have to be introduced into your gym training, into your gym regime. Without these first 3 areas, if you're lacking in any of these first 3 areas, you will not get the most out of your strength and conditioning. And basically, because of our sport, cycling, we have to focus more on these areas than the actual strength area. So I'm going to click on again here. Okay, so if we talk about mobility for a few seconds, basically mobility is defined by a range of movement within one single joint. So our joints have obviously a start point and an end point. The end point of our joints is defined by our structures, our bony contours, our ligaments, our muscles, our tendons, our fascia. And when one of these areas become compromised, it begins to restrict our movement. And when movements become restricted, obviously we end up having compensatory patterns. When compensatory patterns kick in, we end up with biomechanical issues and muscle inhibition. And muscle inhibition is basically when we can't recruit certain muscles. So I'm going to go into a little bit more here. So flexibility. Flexibility is one of the key factors with everything here. Now I know we're talking about gym training. Gym training, obviously for everyone we're associating pure strength with it, but as cyclists, really our priority should be all flexibility. When we talk about our position on the bike, we've just spoken about range of movement first of all. If we look at our position on the bike in the pedal revolution, our muscles are constantly used in a shortened position. And when we use a muscle continuously over time in a shortened position, it becomes very strong, but it adapts to this shortened position and we end up with a very short muscle. And okay, this mightn't be incredibly important for the majority of people if you think about it, but if you think about where our attachments are to certain muscle groups that are affected within the pedal revolution, they have a massive effect on how our pelvis sits and our alignment and how our neutral spine sits. So the hamstring muscle and our hip flexor muscle is 2 muscles that are really affected through the pedal revolution. The hip flexor muscle is a muscle that is used throughout the whole pedal revolution. It is in an incredibly short position throughout the whole movement. Therefore, we become very, very short. Now, when I talk about short positioning of the hip flexor muscle, I'm talking about how this affects us in holding a neutral position on the bike. So there's 2 areas that we have to look at on the bike, and we're talking about anterior pelvic tilts and posterior pelvic tilts. If we look at the image here on the TV screen, we have the woman on the left. Now she's showing a clear example of someone that is holding a posterior pelvic tilt. With this posterior pelvic tilt, as you can see, we have a C shape from we have a C shape from the base of the spine right up to up to the shoulders. Now if we look at the same girl on the right, what she's holding here is basically a neutral position in the spine. And if we go back to what we were saying about a neutral position, our lumbar spine has a natural C shape that we have to maintain through stability, through flexibility. If we have issues in either our hip flexors or our hamstrings or our gluteal muscles, we lose the ability to actually hold this position. Now this is a very common position that if you look at nearly any cyclist from side on, they're going to hold this, and this is because the majority of people don't stretch, and in turn starts to pull our pelvis out of place. Now if we can't hold this position, we're not going to generate power, but at the same time we're going to switch off muscles as well. And I'm going to explain that a little bit better now when we go on to the next slide. So there's one key muscle group that we have to talk about today in terms of hip flexion. The psoas muscle here on the left that we can see isn't necessarily very important in the muscles that propel us forward, but its attachment points are very, very important in how our pelvis sits. Therefore, how our more dominant muscles actually work. Now, if we look at the psoas muscle on the left here, at the top of the thigh is where its actual insertion is, but its origin is all across the 5 lumbar vertebrae of the spine. If we put ourselves back into that position on the bike, when we talk about our pedal revolution, this muscle is being constantly used in the shortened position. So what happens when a muscle becomes used over and over again in that shortened position, like we said before, it becomes very strong for one, but it also becomes very, very short. And when a muscle becomes short, it becomes overactive. And basically when a muscle becomes overactive, its opposing muscle begins to basically deactivate and become lengthened. So I've used a diagram on the right here to show this a little bit better. If you think about its attachment points again, the hip flexor becomes very, very tight, okay? We can see on the side of the spine here, when it becomes tight, it begins to pull the spine forward, increasing the actual the lumbar curve in the lower back. But when this happens, we end up with a crossover effect, and the muscles in the spine end up becoming very short. So this crossover effect is by tightening and shortening of the front muscles in the hip, we get this tightening and shortening of the back muscles in the spine. Now, when a muscle becomes tight, like we said before, its opposing muscle becomes lengthened. And as this pelvis here, if we look at where we have anterior tilt written, this is across the pelvis. When the pelvis begins to rotate forward, what happens is our hamstrings begin to become lengthened, and our abdominal muscles also begin to become lengthened. And when a muscle becomes lengthened, it becomes weak. So if we don't address these tightness issues that are within our lower limbs, even though they're not necessarily muscles that propel us forward, we end up with weaknesses in these areas. And the gluteal muscles and the hamstring are actually a very important muscle into our mechanics and how much power that we generate into the pedals. But also talking about this, if we look at the abdominal muscles where they become lengthened, they also become weakened as well, like what we just said there. So if you could be doing all the core stability work till the cows come home basically, but if you end up with tightness within these muscles, you lose the ability to actually contract these muscles. So this is why I'm going through and making a strong emphasis on for specifically cyclists, that within our gym training it should not be just based on strength work. We should have at least 10-15 minutes specifically working on tight areas, because it's actually almost more important than doing the strength work. You could be doing all the strength work in the world, but when you become tight in these certain areas, which it's completely unavoidable, for the cyclist that you end up actually shutting off all these muscle groups. So there's one other area we need to talk about now, and that is the hamstrings. So the same principle of the hamstrings are the actual, the knee joint, the hip joint, we said, works through a really small range of movement. But the attachment points again of this muscle are incredibly important. If we look at the image on the left here, we have the lower end of the muscles. They attach onto the tibia and the fibula. But the actual origin of this muscle is what's most important to us. And at the base of the pelvis, we have what we call the ischial tuberosity. So the ischial tuberosity basically is what some people refer to as our sit bones, and they're the two bones that you feel when you're sitting on the saddle. Now again, with the pedal revolution, again, we're working the hamstring in a shortened range throughout the whole pedal stroke. Over time, it builds up tightness in this area. And what happens is it acts as a pulling effect on the back of the pelvis, creating what we call a posterior pelvic tilt. And these are two issues. We've already spoken about the anterior pelvic tilt, how it affects both our abdominal muscles and our gluteal muscles and our hamstrings. But this is the opposite effect now to the hamstrings that can occur through the cycling position. So what happens here is that it rotates the pelvis backwards, and the biggest outcome of this is that when we get into our cycling position, it creates, through this posterior pelvic tilt, it creates this long C shape basically from the lower spine right up to the shoulders. Now we've already said what happens with a muscle when it becomes weak, lengthened, that we lose the ability to actually contract it. It becomes underactive. And if we think about the position on the bike, if we go back to that girl who we had the two images from, on the image on the left, she had that C shape right through to the front, and all the posterior muscles in the spine become elongated, where we lose the ability to actually contract it. But the other end of this is that we end up actually shutting off our glutes as well. And a clear example of this is if I got anyone to stand up and do a single-legged squat. So you're standing on, say for instance, your right leg, and you're going to bring your left leg up into the air to a 90-degree position. You're hipping your knee into a 90-degree position. And if I got you to get down into a single-legged squat position, where you round your back, and basically if you did 8 reps of this, all of a sudden you'll start to fatigue in the lower end of the quad, up around the VMO muscle, and down around midway from the quad right down towards the knee. Now after your 8 reps, if you take a second and you get back into your starting position and actually maintain this neutral spine that we were talking about prior, this natural lumbar curve where we don't lose the bend in the lumbar curve, and we carry out the exact same exercise. And the best way to describe it is as you're going down into your squat position on a single leg, basically extending your backside out, all of a sudden you'll feel that the actual load becomes distributed more across the whole quad, and your glutes and your hamstrings all of a sudden begin to fire. So it's a great example to show you the difference that basically a posterior and an anterior pelvic tilt has on how our muscles contract in our legs. And unfortunately for the majority of cyclists, including most of the professionals that are out there, because they're riding their bikes every day of the week, you'll see that from sideways that the majority of people actually have this this C shape coming from their lower back right up to their shoulders. And what happens here is you just end up being over quad dominant and not recruiting the glutes whatsoever. Now, really speaking about, we've spoken an awful lot about flexibility here, and I'm just going to actually move on to the next slide. Clearly, we've been speaking about how our muscles are affected, and through the pedal stroke, how they become shortened and tightened. So I'm trying to highlight these key points why we need to spend so much time on flexibility. An awful lot of people are going to possibly disagree at the moment, and there's a lot of information out there where people say that stretching is bad, and other coaches will tell you not to actually do it. But we're not going to go near that debate today, because basically everything that we've told you prior to this, how it affects our pelvis, how it affects our trunk, becomes a lot more important than actual performance of a muscle. Our stretching actually is more to do with how we keep our biomechanics correct, and through correct biomechanics, correct lumbar spine position, we can recruit all the most important muscle groups that we have in the body. So first of all, we're going to go through a few different types of stretches that you can introduce into your gym training. Not necessarily through just your gym training. This has to be pointed out that this has to be incorporated into your bike work, into right way through the whole season, basically. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is obviously static stretching. It's the most important thing, it's the most common form of stretching that most of us know about. But we'll cover three different types of flexibility, or three different types of stretches that we can carry out. First of all, we'll talk about static stretching. So static stretching is based upon holding a stretch for 10 to 30 seconds. Sometimes people hold this up to 30 seconds. Usually it's good for post-exercise, for the one reason that muscles need to be warm. The problem with static stretching is that when you hold a stretch, the second you go into a stretch, our muscles have a protective mechanism where a muscle will contract once it has this tugging effect on a muscle. Now, the idea of doing a static stretch is that you go into it incredibly slow, and you work into it very, very gently. Again, for holding 10 seconds, once it starts to release, you work into 30 seconds. It's not particularly one of my favorite ones to use, because you can't incorporate it into pre-warm-up. And again, it can be pretty dangerous in terms of if you are even a little bit cold, what you can do is create little micro tears through the stretch reflex that occurs. The other end of it is with regards to performance. Again, it has been proven, and it's been said that while holding a stretch for a prolonged period of times, it can have a negative effect on explosive performance, and basically decreasing your ability to generate power quickly. The next type of stretching we're going to talk about is dynamic stretching. Now, dynamic stretching is very important in terms of warm-ups. It's a very good exercise to incorporate all body movements. It involves balance, it involves stability, but also it involves using all muscle groups at the same time, therefore creating the perfect warm-up for the exercise that you want to actually carry out. So if we think of things like torsos, twists, arm cycles or circles, knee-high jogs, lunges when we walk, they're all various different dynamic stretches that you can incorporate pre-warm-up. Now, the other stretch, one of my favorite stretches that I like to use, and it's probably the most important stretch of all, for the one reason that sorry, we're just going to click back through here. We go back into our stretches. Yeah. So again, we're talking about active isolated stretching. It's a form of dynamic stretching, but the difference between this and the previous dynamic stretching is that we can isolate muscle groups and facilitate it through using a belt or using a rope. The idea with using an active isolated stretch is that we can use it pre-warm-up without more muscles. The idea is that it actually, by isolating a muscle, we can be safe. There's no quick movements involved with this. It's all controlled. And the other end of it is by activating a muscle. By activating a muscle, we basically switch off the opposing muscle. So every muscle has an agonist and an antagonist. When we switch on one muscle, the natural reaction for its antagonist, its opposing muscle, is to switch off to let the joint go through its full range. Now usually what we're talking about with the static stretching, if you go into a stretch or hold it for a long period of time, it ends up contracting for its protective mechanism. We've already gone through this. But by holding a stretch for only 2 seconds, you trick the muscle into shutting off for that few seconds, and then you release it. So by repeating this process over time, over maybe 12, 18 reps, we slowly begin to elongate the muscle through its full range, increasing blood flow, but at the same time being incredibly safe as well. Okay. So next of all, we're going to move into talking about stability. Stability is one of the most important parts that we have to talk about as well. We've spoken about the neutral spine. The idea behind all of this is that we're able to maintain a neutral spine on the bike, and to be able to do this, we have to have proper core stability. Core stability is based upon endurance and static endurance. So when we go to train our core, it's based upon training the muscles without any movement, holding the spine in that neutral position where the spine doesn't become compromised. And when we're talking about the position that we hold on the bike, it's through endurance. If we don't have this endurance core stability, over time as we fatigue, that C shape that occurs in every cyclist, most cyclists, begins to happen even if you're flexible. So we have to combine our flexibility with our core stability, and from that we start to work off our more dynamic movements as well when we need gluteal stability. Now our glutes, again, are a massive important part to how we function on a bike, to how we become more efficient. Our glute medius muscle is a very important muscle in terms of, if you look at the image on the right here, our actual alignment of our knee. Again, if we have any problems in our core, in our flexibility, the first thing that shuts off, like we said, is our gluteal muscles and our posterior chain muscles. So it becomes a big part for cyclists to actually isolate and train on its own, so as that we can correct this alignment that occurs with the knee. And the other end of it is where ITB syndrome, tight ITB bands, it's all associated with cycling. If we can work on stabilizing these glute muscles, pulling our knee back in line, these are all issues that should never be involved with a cyclist. The other end of our gluteal muscles is that it actually is the first initial quarter of our pedal stroke. So if we have this weakness going on in it, we're going to end up overloading our quads and basically putting all the demands through our quad muscle. So we're going to talk about a few exercises that we can work on without actually spending too much time on them. So like we said about our core stability, there's three exercises basically we need to focus on. Minimally, we need to focus on our abdominal muscles on the front. We need to work on our core muscles on the side. We need to work on our core muscles on the back. The reason why we do this is the reason why we work on this, again, is to hold this neutral position on the spine. Now, if we look at the first guy in the picture here, The reason why I have this guy here with a dowel rod on his back is because when we're doing a plank, it becomes very, very difficult to actually hold this neutral position if the body is weak, where the majority of people are weak. Ideally, what we need to do with these 3 exercises to be, well, the first 2 anyway, is to hold them for between 60 seconds and 90 seconds. So we're going to do a static exercise. We're going to hold this for a prolonged period of time. Ideally, this is what you want to be able to hold. But there's a doctor out there called Stuart McGill, and he's a specialist in biomechanics, probably the best in his field. He's been studying it for roughly 30 years now. And he specializes in low back pain and core stability. And he's actually just come out recently and said when we're training in ourselves in a plank position, that it is actually more beneficial to hold the exercise for between 7 seconds and 10 seconds and to come out of this exercise and repeat this process maybe 10 times, maybe 12 times, for the reason being that the majority of people, if you get them in a plank position, they'll be able to hold it for 60 seconds, 90 seconds. But if a therapist or a personal trainer is there to actually watch where their positioning is, if they pull them into the correct position, only little slight adjustments, all of a sudden they start shaking. And the reason being, if you drop your hips slightly during a plank, you begin to actually overload the back muscles, and the core muscles don't engage that much. Again, if you bring the hips a little too high, the emphasis is put on our hip flexors. We're not training our core in this neutral position. So the idea of the dowel rod is that we have 3 contact points. We have one on the sacrum, one on the thoracics, our upper back, and one on the base of the head. And roughly what we should have in the small of our back to know that we're maintaining this neutral position is to roughly the width of our fingers is the gap that we should have between our lower back and the dowel rod. And a good way to actually practice this is to use either a belt or a piece of elastic or a TheraBand, the exercise band. We can tie this around our stomach and tie this around the dowel rod to make this a little bit easier to carry out if you don't have someone spotting you. Again, really important, we have to work on the core muscles in the side of our torso. We've got to work on our back muscles as well. Really important, incorporate the glutes. So we have the likes of the back bridge. Again, with the side plank, start off really slow. Keep your holds roughly between 10 seconds. Repeat them over maybe 10 times rather than trying to hold 30 to 60 seconds at the beginning. Over time, when you actually build up the endurance within these muscles, obviously you can hold these holds for a lot longer. So when over 6, 7, 8 weeks initially, when you start to build up this endurance strength, you can increase this by adding dynamic movements into it. Now, we haven't put any images of these in, but there's plenty of information out there on the internet that you can use. But when I say dynamic movements, I mean maintaining that neutral position. It's imperative that you hold this neutral position, but you bring in arm movements, you bring in leg movements, just to make the stress across the core that little bit more. Other good ways to improve this is by using something that creates an unbalanced surface. So you can use a Swiss ball beneath the arms, or you can do rollouts. But the main thing is that when you start to incorporate dynamic movements through your exercises, is that your spine cannot come out of a neutral position. So next of all, we're going to go on to our gluteal muscles. Now, the gluteal muscles, again, is a really important part for us as cyclists. Like we said, it plays a big role in the alignment of our knee. If you think about the alignment of our knee, if we start to get a valgus force, and basically a valgus force is where the knee starts to fall in toward the midline. If this starts to occur, we start to lose power as well. It acts as a sponge. So a great way to isolate this is the main muscle that affects this is our glute medius muscle. And although the two exercises that I have up on the screen at the moment, you may look at them and think that, these are very, very easy exercises. They actually become very, very important for us because, like we said before, the only way to describe our glutes in the most easiest way possible is that through these tightening issues that occur from the bike position, we switch off these muscles, and it becomes a big problem for cyclists to actually get these muscles to fire. So we start off by doing by isolating the glute medius muscle. We use the first one here, the side lying hip abduction. And what you want to do is start off with your top leg in line with the body, not dropping it down to put any strain across our hip joint. And what you want to do is bring the leg up just to the point where you feel your pelvis starting to kick in. What you don't want is any movement, and the idea of this guy here having his hand on his hip, on his pelvis, is that he stops the exercise and does a hold of 1 second once there begins to be any movement within the pelvis. Now for this, ideally you want to start off 10 to 15 reps 3 times. But the great thing about this exercise is that it can be actually used as a tool. So you can use it to begin your gym sessions to get this muscle firing. You can use it even when you go out on the bike to wake up this muscle. The muscle, like we've just said, is very hard to recruit on the bike, but incredibly important for the bike. But the other end of it is, if you carry, ideally what you want to be working up to is, as it's non-weighted, you want to be working up to 30, 40, 50 reps of this muscle, or of this movement, by 3. So if you carry out this within your training, not just your gym work, you can use this as an actual tool to highlight problems that possibly can be occurring. So if you haven't been stretching and all of a sudden these glutes start to switch off, you've built up over time, you've built up that you can hold 30, 40 reps without any problems. So you wake up some morning and all of a sudden you can only do 15 reps. And it's a clear indication that somewhere along the kinetic chain that something is either switching off, there's an injury occurring, or just that there's a lot of fatigue in and around this area. So again, incorporate this into early on into your gym work, and possibly before you carry out any exercises. And the clam exercise is just another example of number 2 here, of an exercise that isolates the glute medius muscle. And again, you can use this as a tool or just a warm-up, but it is just an isolating exercise to the glute medius muscle. And ideally, when we talk about strength, and stability, we want to start to incorporate not just one muscle, but co-contraction of all our muscles together. So we move on to the next slide here, and we're going to start to talk about exercises that involve one leg, basically. So it's going to mimic similar to what, or basically our sport is we propel ourselves forward with the contraction of one leg while the other leg rests, even if it's only for a very, very short period of time. The force is still only being generated through one leg at one point. So the first one we need to look at is the lunge. And again, the reason why we're doing the lunge is that we are trying to recruit our posterior chain. Although we are recruiting our quad through this muscle, or through this exercise, it is very much a posterior chain exercise where we engage our gluteal muscles. Now there's all sorts of variations to this muscle, to this exercise, but to start off, the best thing for anyone is to just start off with our frontal plane, the sagittal plane, where we're just going to work on straight out in front of us. When you begin to get strength within this exercise and your technique and flexibility again, because like we said before, if we talk about the position that we hold on the bike, we're constantly using certain muscles in a shortened position. The idea of doing these muscles is that all of a sudden we're training these tight muscles through a much longer range of movement and as close to its full range as we can. So by coupling exercises that encourage full range of movement with flexibility, we try to address these issues that have previously been caused by the position we hold on the bike. And again, it's the same principle that if you use a muscle in a shortened position, over time it's going to become short. You can do quite a lot of stretching, but if all the contraction of this muscle is only always carried out in a shortened position, you're going to struggle to ever get that full range back into it. This is why we try to promote exercises that involve more of a full range throughout the whole movements. Now, the next exercise we're going to do is that we can talk about is the single-legged box squat to incorporate into our regimes. The reason we do this one again is that it is a single-legged work. The idea is that we maintain a neutral spine throughout this, and the reason why I have an image of a guy doing it sideways on a box is because we can drop the leg down sideways in line with our body. Often you see people carrying out the box squat where we have the foot put out in front of us, and very similar, the extreme of this would be what some people call a pistol squat. But the problem with this is that if you think about your leg going out in front of you, all of a sudden you start to create tension to the hamstring. And we know from previously, when we put tension on a hamstring, what happens is that it rotates the pelvis backwards. So through this exercise, we're trying to recruit our quads, we're trying to recruit posterior chain gluteal contraction, and ideally keeping the spine in that neutral position. So carry this exercise out sideways from a box, and what you want to do is initiate the exercise from your heel so that the whole force goes through your quad, through your glute, and that you're not helping it through the leg that's hanging whatsoever. The other thing to really note with this exercise is that it really puts an emphasis on how your glute medius functions and gluteal stability. Now, the image we have on the left here in black and white is a clear example of a woman who has very poor stability through her gluteal muscles. And she shows that she's only going down roughly about 3 inches, where if we look at her pelvis from image A right across to image D, you can see how her left hip begins to drop. And this is shown where our actual glute medius muscle is beginning to shut off. It's not able to take the body weight, and the knee starts to veer in, very similar to what the majority of positions are that people have on the bike, where their knees become closer to the crossbar, putting that extra strain across the ITB band, and again putting that focus across the quads more so than the glutes. So in terms of the height of your actual your box for the squat, it's pretty safe to say that you should be starting this off very, very low, and ideally working up to roughly knee height, and then from this point on you can start to introduce weight on top of this. So these are two examples of the unilateral exercise that are very important to incorporate into the regime. So we have our core work, and we have our glute work, where we're trying to activate the actual muscles. Then all of a sudden we're bringing in unilateral leg work, where we're working our quads, we're working all the muscles together, but we're very much putting an emphasis on how we control our knee and keeping it in line. And next of all, we have to incorporate a bit of balance into our exercise as well. So the arborest squat is a brilliant posterior chain exercise. Again, I'm putting emphasis on posterior chain because as cyclists, we always become very quad dominant, and it becomes very important to teach our body to maintain full contraction of our glutes, our quads together, but while maintaining that neutral position. So we can see here easily with the arabesque squat that there's a small slight bend in the knee, but as he lunges forward, or hinges forward, sorry, all the movement is coming from his hip. And it's important to note that absolutely no position change has occurred in his spine, that he's training the glutes and the quads to fire in this neutral position. And these are the very basic starts, or very basic introduction to these exercises. Obviously, you add weight to this over time. You can change these exercises around a lot. And again, the lunge on the Swiss ball is another example of how taking stability out of it, we force our quad, our glute to engage, to keep our knee aligned, and to keep that contraction together with both our glutes, our back, our core, and our quads all together. Okay. So we're going to move on again now to from balance exercises to basically our bilateral strength. Now we're not going to go into the whole strength and conditioning per se, because it's going to take basically it takes an awful lot of time to go through all of this. But what I'm doing is highlighting certain exercises that you can incorporate in that are really specific to cyclists. Now the idea of a front squat is, one, we're going to generate an awful lot of strength through this, but what it does is it promotes correct biomechanics throughout the whole body. With the front squat, if there's any problems, any tight problems within the body, any biomechanical issues, the first thing that goes is you start to drop the weight. And it's very similar to what we call the overhead squat as well. Whereas if we actually get rid of the bar altogether, it becomes a test that we actually use in the clinic. Usually what we would do, and not solely, not singly just on its own as a test, obviously we use an awful lot of other stuff as well, but if we use the likes of a dowel rod and hold it above our head, and we ask someone to get into a full squat position, and basically that's the overhead squat, the exact same position as this but with the arms up above, we're putting tension throughout the whole body, and all our joints have to be able to move in its full range of movement to be able to carry out this exercise. If we have any tightness in the hamstrings whatsoever, we will begin to lose this neutral position. We can see in this guy here, he still has that lumbar curve, that neutral position of the spine. And what happens is, the closer you get, the closer your hip comes towards your knee, and the deeper you go into this position, what happens with tight hamstrings is it starts to pull the pelvis backwards, very similar to the position that the majority of people hold on a bike, and putting an awful lot of pressure down through the spine. And again, making the exercise very much emphasis on the quads. So we're going to use this exercise, one, for strength, but also to maintain that full range of movement throughout the whole body. Again, if we have hip flexor tightness, what can happen is it pulls the torso forward. Again, you'll spill the bar. So it's a brilliant tool, one, for generating strength, but also for keeping in check and making sure our body is functioning correct. Now, obviously, these exercises we're trying to incorporate this throughout the winter, but it's very important to continue this work throughout the season. Obviously, you're not going to be putting a big emphasis on it, and it's going to be pure maintenance throughout the whole year. But even if it's only one session per week throughout the whole season, the idea of having just a few exercises, not necessarily every type of exercise that we had there, but focusing solely on core stability, gluteal function, flexibility, and then one or two exercises like this, it's a great way to maintain that full range of movement in our joints, because the bike is going to really affect how we progress throughout the year. And then finally, one more exercise that is really important for generating power and generating posterior chain work in our glutes and our hamstrings, in our lower back, is the deadlift. Now, what I would say is this is promoting completely neutral spine. If we look at the girl here, and she's in a full deadlift position here, she is showing the correct neutral position of the spine. Now this is obviously slightly exaggerated because she's generating a massive force throughout the spine with the weights. But ideally, the reason why we train our body in this neutral position, for us as cyclists, why it's so important is that we can translate this to our position on the bike. If we can hold this position and train our muscles for 3 months, 4 months on the bike, it's one way of guaranteeing it that you will be able to maintain the neutral position on the bike. Flexibility isn't the only thing that contributes to losing this neutral position on the bike. It's very much down to muscle contraction as well. And although core stability is very important, it's also very important to put a lot of stress through these muscles through exercises that focus on full range of movement as well. And actually, sorry, one more thing that we have to talk about is our upper body. We didn't really speak much about this, but because we basically don't have a whole lot of time. But the upper body is just as important as the lower body. When we talk about core stability, it's not just our abdominals, our back, the side of our abs. It's very much from our shoulders right down to our knees. So we're talking about scapular stability, and we're not going to go into all this now, but a great way to work on upper body and without worrying about putting on weight or muscle in our upper body is to do exercises like this, like the single arm row, using a stability ball in front of you. To make the exercise that little bit harder, you're using one leg for balance, engaging our glute. We're engaging all the muscles, which makes the actual upper body exercise 10 times harder than what it is, making you decrease the weight but still activating those muscles to keep that stability throughout the whole body. So it's very important to regardless of whether the upper body is used throughout our sport, it's still a very important area that we have to work on. And the same thing goes for the likes of press-ups and so on. You can incorporate all this into your work. The close arm press-up is very good because it puts a big emphasis on our tricep muscles, which we use quite a lot throughout when we're out of the saddle. And again, it's just another reason why we should really involve upper body work as well. So what we've done is basically gone through all the different areas that you should be incorporating into your gym work. It's not necessarily a complete gym program, but I'm highlighting the different areas that is incredibly important for the cyclist to be able to maintain a neutral position on the bike, a neutral spine, to make sure that you can recruit your gluteal muscles, which are one of the most important muscle groups for us, and to be more efficient, basically, to be able to last longer on the bike.
Okay, we are going to go to some questions and answers. Just like to say, first of all, there was a lot of information there. I think it's pretty essential that everybody has a good understanding of basic physiology and anatomy. You know, why stability and flexibility are as important than all-round strength, and it's critical that we have that basic understanding and education of why we're doing this kind of flexibility work, this kind of strength work. I, for one, made many mistakes during my cycling career, which led to quite a serious condition with my psoas muscle, which took many years to try and ratify, and it did lead to quite a detrimental effect on my performance, purely because of going into, thinking the old school of going into a gym, doing as many weights as possible, and not really understanding why I was doing what I was doing and what were the actual benefits that was specific to cycling. And I think what Tim is talking about is everything relative, and that is targeted towards us progressing in cycling and making sure that we're better on the bike. So, okay, we're going to there's a lot of questions coming in. We're not going to be able to get through everything, but I'm going to try and get through as much as possible. So I have one here. Okay, so I'm afraid of gaining too much weight by excessive gym and core work. Should I be worried?
No, absolutely not. First of all, to build muscle is actually quite a difficult thing to do. Stability work, core work will not generate any weight gain whatsoever. To actually build muscle, you have to have quite a specific periodized weight program. As a cyclist with endurance being the main part of our sport, it goes against building muscle completely. So with that alone, it's going to make things a lot more difficult to build muscle. But how we build muscle is by incorporating a hypertrophy phase throughout our strength and conditioning. And for cyclists, I wouldn't say not to do this. For any cyclist, because it's a non-weight bearing sport, you leave yourself open very much to injury with gym training. So it's important to put that little bit of hypertrophy in before you do any specific heavy lifting, so that you have some sort of muscle mass there to prevent injury throughout your exercises. But the other end of it is that, like I said before, it is very, very difficult. And even if I take myself for an example, my last year in France in 2005, I got injured and my season got ended pretty quickly. And basically, it was my last year S-Prep where I put an awful lot of emphasis on gym work, something different that I had never done before. I spent 4 months in the gym because I had stopped racing at the time. And usually my weight at the time would have been, roughly 62 kg when I was racing. And I was a guy who was a good climber, a very good sprinter. And weight gain was one of the biggest points that I was really, really frightened of. And one of the main reasons why I actually stayed away from it without knowing anything back then. So that winter I spent 4 months in the gym, very specific weight training, a lot of it based on what was going on in the USA at the time. And in January, when I joined the Sean Kelly team, we had the first testing done with the doctor. And when we got weighed up, I couldn't believe it, that my actual weight had dropped to 59 kg, 3 kg less than what I ever had been throughout my previous years racing. But my power output, usually on our test, we would have maxed out at roughly around, me personally, around 480, 490 on a RAM test. And while being injured throughout the whole winter, doing very little on the bike, but focusing more on four times a week strength and conditioning, I ended up maxing out at 515, 59 kg. So it showed that I gained a massive amount of strength, but actually losing weight through it. Now, I didn't spend a whole lot on hypertrophy, but again, it did play a part into it.
That's great, Tim. Thanks very much. It's good, obviously, to have something referred back to you personally, and it's good to have them personal experiences that sort of you can make it quite relevant to cycling, I suppose, understanding what most of us other athletes are going through. So, okay. So I've got another question here. With these sessions, are you better to do? Obviously, we're talking about the sessions that you've been explaining, Tim. With these sessions, are you better with a few high weights, 1 by 10 to fail, or of low weights, 2 by 15 at 80%, for example?
Okay. Well, when we're talking about a lot of single-legged stuff and the glute work, where the likes of the single-legged box squat and that, initially, or the arabesque squat, these types of exercises, initially what you want to be doing is 3 to 4 sets by 8 to 12, or even 8 to 10. And the idea with this is not really to complete fail. Very much these exercises are based on control. They're not like a squat, where you're going to work yourself basically to the max throughout the exercise, depending on what phase you're in. But balance work and single-legged work is going to be very much down to being able to maintain form throughout the exercise. Being in complete control of your knee alignment and the full range of movement. So the actual exercise itself isn't completely based on fail. It's more about control and working through it this way.
Okay, I have just another question in here. Okay, so during the winter, how many times should you core strength work train versus aerobic cycling cross training, given 4 to 5 days a week of training? Maybe I can sort of look into that from a cycling point of view. Obviously, this is quite a balancing act this time of year, and going towards certainly going towards Christmas, January, February, of trying to get in adequate trainings. Obviously, in the cold, a lot of our training is probably indoors on a bicycle point of view, apart from the weekend spins. And also then trying to maximise gym core work, stability work that we can do both at home. A lot of what you've said here, Tim, we can do, in our own time with, a relative small amount of equipment. A lot of it can be done, which is, I think, is a critical part of it, that a lot of us have families, have work commitments. We don't have time to spend 20 minutes driving to a gym, going to a gym, driving 20 minutes home. That's precious time that we're losing with family, friends, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a really good way to maximise these exercises, is getting into a routine at home, be it early in the morning or in the evening. But to give this as how many days a week that you would do it, I'll give an example of, we have worked with a lot of athletes that we have found, and Tim has had, a lot of time spent with these athletes personally, working with them and seeing imbalances that they have that are critical on their performance, that are very detrimental to their performance. And from that, if there is an imbalance in a muscle or in a leg or whatever it may be, that I would, at this time of year, be more akin to focusing on your stability work, your core work, than your cycling work. So what I'm trying to say is, I would be more, if there is a major imbalancement that is going to not have you at a peak come next April or come next May, personally I would sacrifice slightly a bit of your cycling work, sacrifice a wee bit of your time spent maybe on a turbo or on the road the weekend, and put that time more into maximising your stability work or your core work or whatever. So
Absolutely,
Tim, maybe I'll let you explain a wee bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to be honest, in the winter time, I would be minimum trying to have 2 days a week focusing on your core and strength work. But a lot of this is very much individual. So what I would say is, I would definitely go and find yourself someone who can assess you and see where your weaknesses are. It all depends, like what Stephen was saying, like it completely depends on who you are and how much time you have. But minimum, I would be trying to get 2 days a week. Usually in your adaptation phase, which is for all of us, when we begin our winter training, I would be looking at doing 3 days a week and incorporating as much of this as you can before you begin to make it more specific, and lifting heavier weights where you're going to actually drop the amount of days per week to 2 days per week, where there's going to be a lot more stress going through the body, through our nervous system, where you're going to need a lot more rest. And obviously you can work a lot on the bike then with that.
Okay, we've only time for just another few questions here, so I'm going to try and get through ones that hopefully everybody can relate to. So, okay, another one is, somebody's asking here, would you advise using free weights or machine weights if you had a choice?
Okay. Well, personally, I would advise not going near machines whatsoever. For us, we need to be training our body in functional patterns. The idea for us is we need to recruit all our muscles at the same time together. We need to be focusing on our core, contracting to keep that neutral position. We're trying to work on our range of movement, to have that relationship between our muscles and our range of movement that you can only get by doing functional work. The problem with machines is that if you do a lot of machine work, instead of working all the muscles together, you end up isolating muscles. And the problem with isolating muscles is that you create muscle imbalances, and it's impossible to work both muscles at the same time. So the likes of, how can I say it, a squat is a hell of a lot more beneficial to you than doing a leg extension or a knee extension machine. The benefits are just not comparable whatsoever. With a squat, you're going to work your calves, you're going to work your glutes, you're going to work your hamstrings, you're going to work your back, right up through the whole body. Our core is contracting constantly through it. You jump on for instance, the leg extension machine or the knee extension machine, you're just isolating the quads, and absolutely nothing else is contracting throughout it. So we end up creating this, making it a lot easier to create these muscle imbalances. And absolutely, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I'd stay away from machines. There is a place and a time for machines, but for most people, I would stay away from them if you can.
Okay. All right. I've got one over here about are there any stretches to prevent or reasons behind cramping a lot in races? I think there can be quite a lot of effects of cramping can be from.
That's a very difficult one. Absolutely, yeah. It can come down to dehydration, condition. A lot of people are putting it down to actual neural misfires that can't really tell you why. That some sort of mix up in the system where the neural system isn't getting the message down correctly to the actual muscle, and it ends up cramping. But in general, it depends on what kind of muscle where you're cramping. What I was saying prior to this was the active isolated stretching, compared to the dynamic stretching, is a brilliant one for isolating the muscle. So if you're getting particular cramp in the hamstring, it is a very good type of stretch to target this muscle, and to bring a lot of blood flow into the muscle as well. But cramp can be quite a complicated thing, and not just down to having tight muscles.
Okay, and I think we are just about out of time. It's now about 9:10 here in the evening in Northern Ireland, so I think we have quite an international audience here tonight. So thank you very much for everybody who has been with us. It has certainly, for me anyway, been again another great experience just trying to expand my knowledge, and certainly it's great to hear from experts that have very much focus on cycling, and again what we're talking about is relative to cycling and our sport, and putting it into the context of building an overall performance. Anybody who would like to contact Tim can go via peaksphysicaltherapy.ie or your email address.
It's tim@peakphysicaltherapy.ie. It's all on the website anyway. Absolutely feel free to send me messages, and obviously we're pretty busy, but I'll try to get back to as many as I can. No problem with that.
I'll be sending out the recording to everybody as well in the coming days. And obviously also at Dig Deep Coaching, we are very proud to be associated with so many good brands and people that are extremely knowledgeable and passionate about cycling as we are ourselves. So if there's anything that we can do with Dig Deep Coaching on professional coaching, parameters, whatever it may be, please give me an email at Stephen@DigDeepCoaching, or send us at an email on Facebook and Twitter. Please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We have lots of information, and we always have a lot of offers going on. So I'd like to wish everybody a really good winter. Stay safe on the bike, and thank you very much for everybody coming again. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Bye-bye.